All right, this is self-ownership and property rights, section 3B. All humans are created by God, and so he is every person's owner. God in Christ is the creator and owner of all things. At the same time, having created humans in his image, God has given each person a stewardship over themselves and their property. In relation to other humans, we call each person's stewardship their self-ownership. And this self-ownership can be extended to acquisition of ownership in scarce resources. Ownership is the right to exclusive control, use, or disposal of a resource. We call this property rights in one's person and things, one's civil/political right. All right. So I know you kind of explained the transition in this section, but it seems like at times I'm all for, condescending in our terms and not being overly clever, as we alluded to last time. It seems like, we're always, as neo-Calvinists, we're always taking ideas that already exist and just repackaging them and calling them something new. But I think, shouldn't this just say self-stewardship? Like, aren't we as Christians, and especially as Reformed Christians, aren't we clearly different from secular libertarians in that we believe we don't believe that we have, quote, self-ownership. We believe in self-stewardship and property rights.
Yeah, with respect to God, that's true. Although the scripture certainly explicitly recognizes the category of ownership, and because that's a human-to-human category. So the idea of ownership is certainly biblically recognized, and the distinction is, if I was a steward with respect to you, that would require you to be the owner. So because God is the owner of everything and every person, our stewardship is with respect to him. Of course, there is human-to-human stewardship, but that means that someone is the owner. And because the Bible recognizes ownership as an actual category, what belongs to someone is their own property, and some specific passages, biblical references are given. Exodus 21:16, Matthew 20:15, and Acts 5:4 all refer to it. So those are things that people can look at. So that's what I would say. Let's see. So the main points here would be God is the owner of everything. And so in relation to him, every person has a stewardship over their own life and the things that are theirs. And that one stewardship with respect to God is ownership in relation to others. And that this ownership
Well,
concerns
why can we not?
oneself and scarce
Why
resources.
not articulate it that when someone is trying to lay claim on our life or what in some capacity, why is it? Because why can we not say God has the ultimate authority over my life, and I'm the steward over my particular life and stuff?
That's certainly true. When, and this will be touched on later, when in Genesis 9, you could say God explicitly authorizes what we might call capital punishment. The explicit rationale that God gives is because we are in God's image. And so, what's so important about not murdering someone has everything to do with people in their relationship to God being God's image. And that has to do with their accountability as stewards to the life that God has given them.
Yeah. I like the way Kuyper describes that reference that you just made to Noah in chapter 9. He basically says that Noah has a duty to bring justice. He gives the example, like if this brother kills this other brother, you know, because Noah has 3 sons. I can't remember which sons he uses in this illustration, but if Ham kills Shem, Noah can't spare Ham just because he's his son, and he can't seek vengeance upon Ham just because Shem is his son, but rather, as the magistrate, if you will, over all of creation, Noah has a duty as the magistrate to see the killer brought to justice, which I thought was pretty. You know, he's basically saying Noah can't make either one of these 2 errors because he is not carrying out this commandment as a father.
Right.
Like that's not the sphere. The family is not the. When you think about the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, there's the individual, the family, the state or the civil sphere, and then the church. And what Kuyper is saying is this is a sphere in which Noah, as the head of the state, if you will, he has to carry out justice. So anyway.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's interesting. You don't know where that is, and you don't remember where you read
it's
that.
It's in Common Grace.
It's his book, Common Grace. Great.
Let's see. It's in Common Grace, volume 1.
And the only way that we would, I think, quibble with how that it's expressed is in terms of, civil governance rather than the state, and we'll elaborate on that in a bit. We'll get to that. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, what are some common objections that you have received along the lines of property and property rights? It seems like, from my perspective, I kind of expect the common average non-Christian to believe that we all kind of just have a right to each other's stuff. But what's even more shocking to me is when I hear Christians begin to espouse the idea that because we do have some sort of answering the question for you, so excuse me, but it's amazing how Christians can look at the Bible, they can see God's heart for the poor. You see this in the Old Testament and the New Testament, his care for the marginalized, for the downtrodden, the widow, the orphan, etc. And they somehow interpret that means that we need the state to run all kinds of programs, that we should cheerfully sign over that 58% federal income tax check so that the federal government can do all the things that we as covenant people should be doing. So that's a common objection that a misconception and or objection to our idea of property rights that I've encountered. What are some that you've encountered?
Well, let me just say a few points on that. It brings up the illustration from the biblical texts that we give when Ananias and Sapphira, I guess in Acts 5, the apostle, when they sell a piece of property to bring, ostensibly to bring the profit to the church, and they lie, right, about it. I guess it's Peter or one of the other apostles that says, was this not yours to begin with? And so, in other words, the lie was unfounded. There wasn't any legitimate, obviously it was a lie, but I mean, there wasn't any legitimate basis for it. It was yours to dispose of as you pleased. And so we define ownership as the right to exclusive control, use, or disposal of a scarce resource. And in Jesus's parable in Matthew 20 about the workers, the owner who is hiring people, the employer in the parable, with Jesus's approval, says that very thing, that what belongs to him is his to do with as he sees fit. And this is the nature of our stewardship before God. And so while people have obligations to use their property and what belongs to them in a way that's according to God's moral law and so on, that's not for you or I to decide in terms of other people's property, right? So we have our property, that's for us to be accountable to God for. Not, we're not accountable and therefore don't have a right to determine how other people should use their property.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is an easy thing to confuse, right?
Yeah.
If there's a moral obligation that I have concerning my property, and this is in some way universal, what's universal is that each person has is themselves accountable to God. The universality is not because I have a right over my property, I therefore have the right over someone else's property.
Yeah.
And that's why these distinctions are so important, to help us think about our obligations before God correctly.
Yeah. I also think there's something there's something about using violence to force people to do good.
Mm-hmm.
It is just I don't know if you're a big fan of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings or not, but there's kind of this question, what would have happened if in that moment when Frodo tries to give Gandalf the ring, what would have happened if Gandalf would have taken the ring?
Right.
And in one of his private letters, Tolkien actually answers that question. I think one of his publishers or somebody had asked him the question. And he says, well, in so many words, Gandalf himself answered that question. Then he elaborates, he wrote about Gandalf's response, that if Gandalf would have taken the ring, he would have wielded it with the goal of accomplishing good. But in controlling the Nazgul and bringing all the forces of Mordor under his control after defeating Sauron, because Gandalf already has one of the rings of power, or one of the three Elvish rings that was given to him at some point. So with the Ring of Fire and the Ring of Power, he would have basically become like this giant patriarchal state in Middle Earth where he's forcing everybody to do good. And Gandalf's reflection on that was basically, I would make people hate good. Like goodness would become terrible in the sight of the people. I mean, and this is just part of Tolkien's own, he was an anarchist. He would have been, although Catholic, he was in more politically speaking in the camp that we're talking about here, where he thought, the idea of using terrible force to make people do good things, it corrupts goodness.
And Galadriel says that, if that's her name,
Yep.
yeah, she actually comes out with that herself. Yeah, gives us a glimpse into what that's like. And in some of our references, citations, I mentioned, and I think I mentioned before, Gerard Casey, and he has an essay somewhere on that as well, or mentions it in his book, that, and this has been mentioned by others, that when you coerce someone to do something good against their will, maybe externally the thing they're doing is good, but it doesn't constitute a moral thing on their part. Freedom is required to choose the good thing.
Yeah.
And then it's moral. So it vitiates, it guts morality when we try to do that.
Yep.
It's dangerous and bad.